a guy that for the life of me, I don't know if I'll ever spell his name right, and that's JURICKSON Profar. I don't know why. It just doesn't happen. And I talk about this guy all the time. Spelling is hard, apparently. Apparently, I did not go through third grade. Also, we'll get into his contract, what that's going to look like. How does it fit with this Toronto Blue Jays team? We'll go over all of that. What are the odds? What are the likelihood of him actually being a Toronto Blue Jay? He's a guy that's been on our radar. We'll get into him. And then Andres Jimenez had some quotes talking to the media about coming to Toronto, so we'll get into that in the third segment. Not anything crazy, but it's pretty interesting to see the outlook of players who are now coming here and what they think of the city and the people and everything like that. Carter, let's just jump into it, my man. What do you think of JURICKSON Profar?
I'm going to start with just the position that this guy plays. If you've been listening to this podcast whatsoever, like at all throughout the offseason, honestly, even in September, you'll know that all we've really been talking about is the need for a corner outfielder. Right field, left field. George Springer can play left field or right field. That doesn't really matter. And again, is there really that big of a difference between right field and left field? For the grand majority of players, not really. It's not going to change too much. So we talked a lot about Teoscar Hernandez, talked a lot about Anthony Santander. Those are the two bigger fish in this free agency. But there's a little bit of an intriguing piece here that feels a little bit more like a Toronto Blue Jays signing just because of the price tag, and that is JURICKSON Profar. This guy's had a weird career, to say the least. Just going, starting at 2020, from 2020 to 2022, played for the San Diego Padres, just really wasn't that good. Hit like 230 to 240 his entire tenure there over those 3 years. Nothing too crazy happening. And then he went to the Colorado Rockies and somehow got even worse playing at Coors Field. During then, he slashed 236 with a 316 on base and a 364 slugging for an OPS of 680. And they actually ended up releasing JURICKSON Profar that season. Goes back the Padres on a minor league deal, re-signs with the Padres in 2024. And that is when all of the magic happened with JURICKSON Profar. He had a 1 year, $1 million deal with $1.5 million in incentives. And we'll go over the stats after a while. But obviously, this was one of the best bargains in all of baseball for 2024. You just don't really see JURICKSON Profar, any MLB player, being in their 11th MLB season and all of a sudden just being a completely different player than they have been throughout their entire career.
Yeah, it was shocking to see. Like, it was one of those guys that you sort of knew was in the league for a while, but you never gave a second look. And I think that's what happened with a lot of teams here in the MLB. They didn't really give him a look because he never showed. He showed some promise, but it wasn't like this guy was going to jump off the page. And then all of a sudden, he comes out of nowhere and has his best season ever. I don't know. Like, it was a little bit, this is a weird one, Carter. Like, I sort of was going over stats. I was going over the money talks, sort of how he fits. And you're right. This feels like a very Toronto Blue Jays signing in the sense that it's a guy on the up, right? You don't know. There's a little bit of question marks around him. And that just, for some reason, the Blue Jays want to take shots at those guys. And the 11th season, Carter, that's one of those things that really gets me, because we always talk about if a guy plays really good for 5 years and has one bad season, you can't take the one bad season. But if a guy plays terrible or not great, and then he has one good season, do you take the one good season as, okay, maybe he's figured it out? Or do you take it as he's a bad player with one good season? This is the conundrum here that I think all of Toronto Blue Jays fans, when they look at JURICKSON Profar, are going to have to ask themselves, what do you take out of this? Do you take it as he's a good player and he finally figured it out? Or is he a bad player who had a lucky season? Where do you sort of stand on here? Do you feel like he's a bad player with one good season, or he is a good player and he just is finally hitting his stride?
When you talk about players and having these type of seasons, it really depends on kind of what age they are for me a lot of the time. If you have a guy that is 22 playing in his 22, 23, 24 season, he gets significantly better in his 2020 or his 24 season. That makes more sense. Just having more MLB experience, obviously just growing into his own body. Obviously, when you're going into the league at 22, you're not fully built yet. You're still growing, still developing. When you're 31 years old and you've had a career, like just going over his career stats, I'll go over his career slash line, and then just go over his stat line from this last season. So for his career in the regular season, 245 average, a 726 OPS, nothing too crazy here. As slugging usually around just over 300. And then we'll just quickly go into what JURICKSON Profar did in this last season. So he slashed 280 with a 380 OPS, a .259 slugging with an OPS of 839, 24 home runs, 84 RBIs, a WRC plus of 139, 158 hits, 29 doubles. Like when you go down the list of Jurickson Profar seasons, there's just nothing even remotely close to what happened here in 2024. But when you look at this season, you look at the Padres lineup, he was hitting 2 to 3 and very consistently. And you have a team with Fernando Tatis, Manny Machado, Bogarts, Jackson Merrill, obviously getting better throughout the season. Cronenworth is still over there. So there's a lot of players that are very good players in the Padres system. So he did have a very good 2024. You can't take that away from him whatsoever. When we talk about some of these bullpen arms, we talked about Jordan Romano all the time. We talked about Chad Green. We talked about, for example, Kevin Gausman. You look at what they've done throughout their careers, and you have this anomaly here. Normally what we were doing on this podcast is going back to kind of their career averages and what they've done throughout their career. So I think we have to kind of have the same thought process with a guy like Jurickson Profar. This reminds me a little bit of a Jorge Soler signing from kind of last season, where you have a guy that can hit for power, not traditionally as much for Jurickson Profar, but again, coming off of a good season, probably an overpaid candidate, and that's something that you're going to have to undertake the risk on if you're willing to sign Jurickson Profar to a 2, 3, 4, maybe even a 5-year contract.
Yeah, and we'll get into the contract in the second segment here because this is where the money plays into it, right? How much can you afford to pay this guy if this is going to be your option? But Carter, just to preface all the contract talks, I want to get into his baseball savant from 2024 because it is a sea of red in the hitting category. He in 2024, he was a great hitter. Through and through, every statistic that you want to see in the red, which means in the higher percentile, was fantastic. Like it was like he woke up one day with superhuman powers. That's how drastic the change for Jurickson Profar was. So I don't know, Carter. I mean, like 92%, or sorry, let's go here. Slugging percentage, 72 percentile. Average exit velocity, 80 percentile. His barrel percentage is pretty average, 43 percentile. Hard hit percentage, 71st percentile. His sweet spot percentage, lower, 19th percentile, not great there. But his bat speed, average, 45. His squared up percentage, 69 percentile. Then his chase, whiff, K rate, and walk rate, all within the 88th to 90th percentile. It is just, it's an anomaly. And so that's why you've had these conversations before with friends, people that have listened to the podcast, and they come at us and say, why do you think Bo Bichette is going to have a bounce back year? Because I look at everything Bo Bichette has done, still a young player, still time to develop, and he's been excellent up until the past season. Now, looking at a guy like Jurickson Profar, you're exactly right, Carter. I think we have to look at it sort of in the same vein. He was not a good player for the majority of his career. Now at the age of 31, decides to have a breakout year. And you're right. This exactly the guy I was going to bring up to a T was Jorge Soler, because this is the exact thing I think about. And that scares me here. And I know we've had the conversations about the Santanders, the Teoscar Hernandez, two more proven guys. Now, is Jurickson Profar your best option 3? Probably. I mean, if you're good, I think if you get to an option 3, you're taking a shot, right? And Jurickson Profar would be that shot. But when you have two options like Anthony Santander, who you can throw the bag at, or Teoscar Hernandez, who you could probably also overpay and still have and get somebody that you know is going to be good. That's the difference here. If you have to pay Jurickson Profar, which the contract we'll get into, and then he has a bad year, this is going to look terrible on the management team. And that's why, again, more into this in the next segment here, but I think the smart play would be to get one of those two guys. And I know, might be the most obvious thing I've ever said is to sign Teoscar Hernandez or Anthony Santander. But they're still available. And I think if you want to get these guys, you're going to have to overpay right now. And I think that in the case of those two players, this would be the time to make that overpay. I don't think you want to overpay on a player like Jurickson Profar, who isn't as proven as those two guys.
Jurickson Profar shouldn't be in the same conversation as a guy like Teoscar Hernandez and Anthony Santander. No disrespect to Jurickson Profar, but you just look at these guys' floors. You look at the floor for Santander, you look at the floor for Teoscar Hernandez, 20 home run season, 20, 25 doubles probably in there. You got RBIs of 70 probably at a minimum. You look at Jurickson Profar, I mean, like, this guy could have a season where he's hitting 230, has an on base of 300, slugs 320, and then you're left with the 2024 Toronto Blue Jays offense again. So that's not exactly where you want to go back to. And just like looking at Jurickson Profar throughout his career and just looking at some of the career highs he had this season, career high in home runs, career high in RBIs, second highest season in doubles, career high in obviously over a significant period, not just a 20-game stretch, but career high in batting average, career high in OPS, slugging, second highest of his career. There's so many different things. Again, I'll go into it in the second segment as well. I have some other more advanced statistics that just clearly show that Jurickson Profar at least got a little bit lucky this season. I'm not going to say that he's a bad baseball player, but are you expecting to get 2024 Jurickson Profar in 2025? I think that you're a little bit naive if that's what you're thinking, if he's going to come to the Toronto Blue Jays.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think this is the time, as the excitement of the offseason hits us all, we have to take a step back sometimes and think, because we've seen Jurickson Profar's name thrown all over the place in Blue Jays land of that, oh, this guy's an option. We should pursue him. And then it's like, wait a second, let's take a step back here and just think about our options, because throwing a bag at a player that could hit 230 isn't something this Blue Jays team can handle going into 2025. But in saying that, Carter, we got some more to get into. I know you want to get into some more advanced statistics. We got to go into the contract talks, and then we will